The ravine was 22 meters across at its narrowest point, a slit of black rock and moon-bleached dust cut into the Karif Highlands like a knife wound. At 0217 hours, Blue Team had 3 magazines left between 5 breathing men, 1 shattered radio, and a corpsman working by touch because white light would get them killed. Send help. Petty Officer Evan Mercer whispered into a damaged PRC. 163. Voice so low it barely rode the static. He wasn't asking for a miracle. He was asking for anyone still alive on the net. Above them, enemy muzzle flashes stitched the ridge in hard, orange bursts. A PKM hammered from 11 o'clock. A heavier weapon, probably a DSHK mounted on a truck bed, was chewing the canyon lip at measured intervals, the rounds cracking overhead with a flat, violent sound that meant they were close enough to matter. Stone shards sprayed into Mercer's neck. He didn't flinch. He was one-handed on the handset, the other clamped over the chest seal of the team leader bleeding beside him. Then the PKM stopped. No warning. No long heroic buildup. Just silence where automatic fire had been. A second later, a man on the ridge pitched backward and vanished from the thermal blur like someone had cut his strings. Another silhouette jerked sideways. Another collapsed over a boulder and did not move again. 3 shots. 3 effects. All from an angle the enemy clearly hadn't expected. Mercer looked up through the canyon throat. Through night vision, the ridge line flickered in grainy green. 30 meters right of the dead gunner, he caught a shape moving low and impossibly fast along the shale. Not charging, not hesitating, just flowing from shadow to shadow like the mountain had decided to grow teeth. Back at the Maritime Operations Center, 200 kilometers away, Colonel Isaiah Rourke leaned over the blue glow of the ISR table and listened to the same broken transmission in his headset. "Whoever that is," he said, not taking his eyes off the moving icon on the display, "just bought Blue Team 90 seconds they did not have." Commander Reese Dalton, the SEAL Troop commander, stared at the track. "That can't be her." Rourke's answer was quiet. "It is." On the screen, one lone friendly marker moved toward a kill box full of heat balloons and enemy signatures. No QRF. No air cover in the stack. No room for error. Just one woman crossing 800 meters of hostile rock in a crosswind that had already grounded 2 drones, while 5 Navy SEALs bled in the dark and 25 armed men closed around them. The question in that room was not whether she was going to make contact. The question was how she had known where to step before the trap, even closed. 18 hours earlier, the air on Marrow Key tasted like salt, jet exhaust, and old steel. The island itself was little more than a stripped ridge of coral and concrete turned into a forward maritime station, its docks crowded with ribs, palletized ammunition, and fuel bladders sweating under camouflage netting. The sea to the east was silver under a low dawn. To the west, the mainland of Karif rose in layered shelves of sand, basalt, and pale limestone, a geography built for smugglers, insurgents, and men who preferred line of sight over law. Chief Warrant Officer Mara Vance stood alone in the signal van with a mug of coffee she had stopped pretending to drink. The coffee had gone cold 15 minutes earlier. The radio set in front of her had not. She wore no rank on the outside of her plate carrier, because on Marrow Key, the people who needed to know already knew, and the ones who asked usually regretted it. Her rifle leaned against the bench by her knee, suppressor already mounted, optic caps open. On the folding table in front of her sat a ruggedized tablet running layered terrain data, old cadastral maps, weather overlays, route estimations, and a hand-drawn grease pencil sketch she had made from satellite shadows and flood patterns. She reached out and dragged 2 fingers across the map, zooming in on a stretch of dry wadi north of Al-Qadar Relay Station. For contour lines, a collapsed farm road, stone terraces, a heat sink where there should have been uniform temperature. Lieutenant Naomi Kim stuck her head through the van door. "You've been staring at that same patch of dirt for 40 minutes. "It's not dirt." Kim stepped in, closing the light behind her. She was Air Force, signals intelligence, sharp enough to look rested when nobody else did. "That patch of whatever it is has become personal." Mara tapped the screen. "See this depression? Not geological." Kim leaned closer. Old trench. No. Drainage cut. Maybe irrigation channel. Maybe covered access. Mara pinched outward. The image sharpened into a gray lattice of broken field lines. These terraces are older than the relay station. Older than the Civil War. People here built under rock because rock survives artillery. You think Brass Crescent is hiding a tunnel network under a goat ridge. I think the only people who stay alive in Karif are the ones who hide one layer deeper than the other guy expects. Kim folded her arms. You should put that in the brief. Mara gave the faintest shake of her head. I did. 2 versions ago. And they liked the missile inventories more. Kim watched her for a second. You still do that? Do what? Say things like that instead of saying you're irritated. Mara finally took a sip of the coffee, grimaced, and set it down. She was in her mid-30s, lean the way mountain runners get lean, with dark hair pulled tight beneath a headset band and the kind of face people underestimated because it didn't look loud. There was a thin, pale scar crossing the left side of her jaw, almost hidden unless the light struck it sideways. Most people meeting her for the first time noticed her hands before anything else. They were steady, not calm. Steady. There was a difference. I'm not irritated, she said. Kim looked at the cold mug. Right. Outside. The 47 spun up on the far pad, rotors slapping the air into a hard metallic thump that rattled the van walls. Mara adjusted the map again, then picked up a grease pencil and circled the depression. Blue team's exfil route threads here, she said. If somebody wanted to box them, this is where you do it. Upper Ridge controls the south exit. Dry Canal traps movement. Good PKM lines. Heavy gun on the east lip, you own the whole throat. Kim frowned. You're saying our route is an ambush template. I'm saying if I had 8 men, 1 technical, and any patience at all, that's how I'd build it. Kim was still looking at the screen when Rourke's voice came over the operations intercom. All principals to briefing in 2 minutes. She glanced up. You going in as an observer again? That was the plan. Kim's expression shifted. And if the plan changes? Mara slid the tablet into a protective sleeve, clipped it to her kit, and picked up her rifle. Then we'll find out who wrote the real one. The briefing room smelled like thermal printer paper, coffee, damp canvas, and a low human electricity of people trying not to announce they were worried. A digital map of the Karif littoral stretched across the wall screen, all false-color topography and pulsing icons. Around the table sat the men and women who translated uncertainty into orders. Pilots, intel officers, weather, SIGINT, fires, and at the far end, Commander Reese Dalton with his sleeves rolled, forearm scarred, jaw already set against argument. Dalton had the compact, armored stillness common to men who had spent most of their adult life near explosions and had learned that economy of motion could feel like authority. He glanced at Mara once as she entered, then back to the screen as if he had already cataloged and dismissed whatever complication her presence represented. Rourke stood at the head of the table, one hand on the remote. He was old enough to have stopped needing to prove he belonged in the room. Gray at the temples. Ranger tab, old jump injury in the way he planted his left foot. Voice that never rose because it didn't have to. Listen up, he said. At 2000 tonight, Task Unit Trident will insert Blue Team by RHIB along Sector Indigo. Objective is Al-Qadar Relay Station and associated logistics cave 2.8 clicks inland. We assess Brass Crescent is preparing movement of anti-ship components through that corridor within 48 hours. He clicked. The image changed to a cluster of structures on a basalt shelf above a dry valley. Priority 1 is site confirmation and sensor emplacement. Priority 2 is SSE if conditions allow. Priority 3 is identifying a high-value courier known as Nasser Carey, suspected facilitator between Brass Crescent and foreign procurement handlers. We get clean proof. 5th Fleet gets legal coverage to interdict the maritime leg. A weather officer spoke next, pointing with a laser. Wind shifts after midnight. Surface gusts 30 to 35. Ceiling lowers from scattered to broken. If you want ISR persistence, your best window is from 2030 to 0115. After that, feeds degrade. Dalton nodded once. Blue Team's total time on objective? 40 minutes ideal, 70 max, Rourke said. Exfil. The map lit a blue line through the ridge system. Mara felt her shoulders tighten. Southwest through Wadi 7. Then hard turn west to pick up at Shore Point Echo, the operations chief said. 3.6 clicks on foot. Dalton glanced toward the back of the room. Route selection on what basis? Least civilian presence. Lowest observed traffic. Best concealment from the road grid. Mara spoke before she decided to. And best terrain for an ambush. Every head in the room shifted. Dalton's eyes settled on her. Do tell. Rourke didn't stop her. Mara stepped to the side screen and enlarged the route. This canal bed here. These terraces. They're not just cover. They're compartmentalization. If anybody controls the ridge shoulders, you're moving down a funnel with almost no vertical escape. The thermal anomalies along this contour suggest hollow substrate or buried stonework. That means concealed movement. Maybe storage. Maybe tunnels. An intelligence captain at the far end frowned. We've had no ISR confirmation of subterranean access. No persistent thermal after sunset. No ground-penetrating radar. And your most recent full-pass imagery is 9 days old, Mara said. That's not confirmation of absence. That's a gap. Dalton leaned back in his chair. You're recommending what? Alternate exfil north for the first click, then west through the Salt Cut. Longer by 6 minutes. Harder climb. Less predictable. He stared at the screen, then at her. Salt Cut puts my people on Skyline for 200 meters. Only if they stay on the ridgeline. There's a dead fold under the north face. Wide enough for a loaded man. Single file. Meaning slow. Meaning alive if the south route is burned. The room held its breath in that quiet professional way where no one wanted to become a story. Rourke asked, How confident are you? Mara answered honestly. Confident enough to want a contingency. Dalton rested both palms on the table. Chief, with respect, my team is not trading a known route for an academic theory. Her voice stayed even. It isn't academic. No. His mouth flattened. Because from where I'm sitting, you're a fires liaison attached to my operation who hasn't walked this coast in the last 6 months, and I'm the one sending men into it. That got a reaction from exactly nobody, which made it sharper. Mara met his gaze. Then send them with a second way out. Dalton looked to Rourke. Sir. Rourke's expression did not change. Primary exfil remains as briefed. Alternate north cut approved for emergency only. Blue team gets both. Dalton gave the smallest possible nod. It was assent without surrender. Fine. Mara stepped back. The brief moved on, but the room's center of gravity had changed. 10 minutes later, as satellite photos and signals intercepts cycled overhead, she caught one more detail. A blurred image of a white cargo truck entering the Al-Qadar compound at 0312 the previous night, escorted by 2 pickups with mounted guns. The vehicle manifest was unknown. The truck's rear axle sagged under the load. Too heavy for food. Too careful for scrap. Kim, seated along the wall with a laptop open, typed a note and slid it to Mara when Dalton wasn't looking. You were right about one thing. Mara wrote back without taking her eyes off the screen. Only one? Kim flipped the note. Traffic spike on encrypted handhelds near Wadi 7. Started 3 hours ago. Not a main brief. Mara's jaw tightened. She looked toward Adrian Pike, the civilian intelligence liaison in the room, a man with perfect collars and a habit of folding uncertainty into bland language until it looked acceptable. Pike was discussing source confidence with the analyst beside him. He had not mentioned the handheld traffic. Rourke dismissed the room 43 minutes later. Chairs scraped. Radios clicked. People became purposeful. Dalton intercepted Mara by the exit. You like being right in public, he said. No, but you don't mind it. Only when the alternative gets people killed. He studied her face, perhaps searching for arrogance and finding something less convenient. My team has rehearsed this route twice. Then they'll have no trouble remembering a second. That wasn't my concern. She adjusted the sling on her rifle. What was it? He lowered his voice. I know who your father was. The corridor beyond them hummed with boot traffic and generators. Mara did not move. Dalton continued. Master Chief Nathan Vance. I served under men who served under him. Good name in the community. Means something. It means he's dead. Dalton didn't blink. It means some people in this task force assume you're here because of history. She let that sit between them. And what do you assume? That Colonel Rourke does not bring passengers. Then we agree on something. His gaze dropped briefly to the tablet clipped to her vest. You have a bad habit, Chief. You watch the map like you want to solve it before the first boot touches dirt. The map's usually kinder than the dirt. He almost smiled at that, but not quite. Tonight, I need my people thinking like hunters, not geometry professors. And I need your people to come back. He stepped aside first. It was not an apology. It was not dismissal either. It was the beginning of a recalculation. By 1900, the island had shifted into that specific pre-mission cadence that felt almost ceremonial from the outside and brutally practical from within. Weapons benches under red light. Thin gloves snapping onto hands. Velcro tearing. Somebody checking batteries for the second time, because everyone had seen what happened when someone didn't. The sea wind carried diesel from the dock and the mineral bite of oncoming weather. Mara sat on an ammunition crate outside the maintenance shed and built her kit by touch. 3 loaded rifle magazines front center. 2 left, 1 right side upside down for index. Pistol mags at 11 o'clock. Tourniquet accessible with either hand. Suppressor tight. Laser aligned. DEGR updated. Attack routes downloaded. 1 collapsible antenna. 1 spool of chem tape. 1 breaching strip she hoped not to use. 2 smoke grenades, black and violet. 1 fractured old compass her father had carried in Borneo before she was born. The lens cracked, the cardinal points still true. Kim walked over with a waterproof envelope. Latest Intercept Digest. Mara took it. Any mention of Carrie? Indirect. 2 couriers saying the accountant travels tonight under guest escort. That's new. So, is this? Kim crouched beside the crate and lowered her voice. Pike stripped 3 lines from a report before the brief. Mara looked up. Which 3? Handheld traffic around Wadi 7. Local generator startup near the terraces. And a phrase match from a previous brass crescent intercept. What phrase? Kim hesitated. Prepared corridor. Mara stared at her. I checked a raw take myself, Kim said. Could mean anything. Smuggling. Vehicle passage. Casual labor. Could mean kill zone. Also could mean Pikes trying not to flood Dalton with every half-confidence data point. Mara slipped the envelope into her kit. You believe that? Kim's silence answered for her. On the far side of the pad, Blue Team moved toward the RHIB staging area in pairs, faces darkened, gear taped, rifles tight to chest. Professional shapes in disciplined motion. Mercer was easy to spot because he carried extra medical load and never walked like he was burdened by it. Beside him was Lieutenant Owen Hale, Blue Team leader, broad-shouldered, controlled, the kind of officer who saved words because he expected his men to understand the first one. Hale paused at the edge of the floodlight spill, looked toward Mara, and crossed the pad. Chief Vance. Lieutenant. He took in her kit with 1 quick glance. Heard you argued for a second exit. Argued is a strong word. Commander Dalton used a stronger one. Hale's mouth moved half an inch. Appreciate the alternate. She nodded. Hope you never need it. He passed her a laminated kneeboard card. Emergency brevity revisions. We added your North Cut to codeword slate. If I call chalk line, my people know where to go. Mara tucked the card away. Good. Hale looked toward the dark water where the ribs waited. You think the route's hot? I think the enemy's been unusually careful for people moving crates. That a yes. That's a reason to stay suspicious. He seems satisfied with that. Mercer says you fixed his SAT upload during training. His antenna was seated wrong. He said you fixed it from across the room without looking. Mara shrugged. His cursing gave it away. Hale's expression settled into something more serious. If this night goes bad, and I mean if it goes truly bad, Rourke said you'd be the one he trusts to read the ground from the screen. That mattered to me more than ranks do. Before she could answer, Mercer jogged over, helmet clipped, med bag bulging. Sir, we're lifting in 60. He caught sight of Mara. Chief, if you jinx us with that face, I'm filing paperwork. My face is within standard. Your face says all the batteries in the world won't fix the plan. That's because they won't. Mercer grinned, but it faded quickly. You really think we'll need chalk line? I really think you should remember the word. He tapped the side of his headset. Copy. Hale held her gaze 1 second longer. See you on the other side. She watched them move off to the boats, boots drumming hollow over steel grating. Wind pushed cold off the sea. Above the mainland, clouds were gathering in layered gray bands like stacked bruises. At 2037, Blue Team vanished in a black water under no moon, riding low and fast across a chop that slapped hard enough to bruise through body armor. The operations center followed them through a lattice of icons and intermittent drone feed, the sort of digital omniscience that always felt complete until it failed all at once. Mara took her station at the rear ISR console while Kim worked adjacent signals. Rourke stood behind both. Pike stayed near the wall, murmuring to another analyst whenever information became inconveniently specific. Dalton remained on headset, one hand braced on the table, body angled toward the screen as if proximity could bend outcomes. For the first hour, everything looked clean. Blue Team made shore, crossed the beach seam, cut inland through salt brush and black rock, halted twice for passing vehicles, avoided a herder camp, reached Overwatch above Al-Qadar Relay Station at 2211. Feed quality was marginal but usable, just enough infrared smear to show guard rotations. 2 parked pickups and the white cargo truck Mara had seen the brief, now tucked beneath a camouflage tarp beside the generator shed. Hill's voice came through the net at low power. Overwatch established. 6-packs, visible compound exterior. No carry PID. Truck remains on site. Beginning sensor placement. Dalton answered. Copy y'all. Stay cold. Mercer's whisper followed. Chief, you seeing the west wall heat bloom? Mara leaned closer. There it was. A soft, rectangular warmth on the stone, gone almost as soon as she noticed it. Affirm, she said. Possible interior access. Marking. Dalton looked at her. You on my net now? Rourke put me on contingency comms. He clearly did not like that, but the moment passed because Hale came back. We have movement, Hale said. One additional vehicle approaching South Road. Hole. On the screen, a dim shape rolled into compound view. Pickup. For dismounts. One man in a long coat, escorted differently than the others. Not deference. Security. Pike stepped forward. That could be Carrie. Mara asked could. Source confidence 70%. Dalton's eyes stayed on the feed. Hale, can you get visual? Working. Seconds stretched. The team leader shifted position. Feed jittered in wind. Then Hale's voice changed, not in volume, but in density. Negative carry. Repeat, negative. That's not our courier. Rourke said, then who? Hale answered, female. Civilian clothing under outer wrap. Hands bound. No one in the room moved. Mercer cut in. Chief, truck bed is open. I count canisters. Cylindrical. Sealed. About 1.4 meters. Mara was already magnifying the blurred image. Not canisters. Launch tubes. Pike swore under his breath. Rourke turned. Talk. Mara's finger traced the frame. Foreign anti-ship components, yes. But not staged for sea movement. These are prepped for assembly. If that woman is who I think she is, they just changed the timeline. Dalton glanced sharply at her. Meaning, she's Dr. Samira Velez, maritime guidance engineer. Disappeared from Port Calder 3 weeks ago. Pike snapped. That identification is not confirmed. Mara didn't look at him. Left hand limp from old femur repair. She's favoring it. Hairline matches dossier. If Brass Crescent forced her to integrate targeting, they don't need to move the missiles yet. They just need a firing solution. The room got colder without changing temperature. Rourke said it plainly. What's in range? Mara answered just as plainly. Commercial shipping lanes. Our destroyer screen. Maybe Marrow if they move launchers high enough. Dalton keyed his mic. Blue Team, mission priority shifts. Confirm identity if able. If secure capture impossible, you get eyes on technical package and exfil. No heroics. On screen, Hale and his men ghosted lower toward the compound wall. Wind hissed against the drone microphones. Somewhere under all that static, metal clanged. A dog started barking. Kim leaned closer to her station. I lost one of the peripheral audio taps. Storm front. Maybe. Maybe not. Then everything broke at once. A burst of white tore across the feed. Not gunfire. Floodlights. Compound exterior lit hard and cruel. The dog went frantic. One of the pickups swung its mounted gun toward the western wall before Blue Team had breached it. Compromised, hail snapped. Compromised. Breaking contact. The feed dissolved into movement and heat. Blue Team sprinting through a side gap. Enemy firing from 2 directions, then 3. Someone screamed in Arabic. Mercer's weapon chattered in short, controlled bursts. A grenade flashed behind the generator shed. The woman, Dr. Valles, disappeared from view in a knot of bodies dragging her toward the truck. Dalton's voice cut through the noise. Execute exfil south. Move. Mara's entire body locked around one fact. South. Ale, she said, keying over him. Chalk line is cleaner. Repeat. North cut is cleaner. Dalton turned on her. Not now, but Hale answered while breathing hard and firing between words. Negative. South is closer. We have 1 hit. The screen followed them for 90 seconds, maybe less. Then one by one, the external drone eyes began dropping out. First West Ridge, then Canal Bend. Then the micro-US Blue Team had launched from their own kit, returned a spray of static and died. Kim's hands flew over her keyboard. We're being jammed. Direction? Mara asked. Local, strong, frequency agile, which meant planned. Blue Team's icons reached Wadi 7. Mara watched the kill box she had circled that morning fill with enemy heat. The first burst from the DSHK walked through the canal like a chainsaw. One friendly marker stopped moving. Another veered to cover. The net erupted in clipped violence. Contact front. Left ridge. Mercer on me. I'm hit, I'm good. Smoke out. Negative effect, wind took it. The gun thundered again. The south exit bloomed with more signatures. Too many, appearing from ground that should have been empty if the area were open terrain. Not open. Hollow. Covered access. Rourke's jaw hardened. Dalton went still in the terrible way competent men do when panic would only waste time. Mara said, They came through the terraces. No one contradicted her. Pike stepped in behind them, voice suddenly too controlled. We should stand down rescue planning until we verify numbers. Dalton whipped around. My men are in a canyon, and any immediate response walks into the same trap. Sit down, Adrian. Rourke never raised his voice. Naomi, any air. Storm cell just crossed the coast. Rotary, still 5-0 on launch. Fixed wing can hold edge, but no positive PID through cloud. Mara was already moving. Dalton saw it first. Where are you going? To the pad. With what authority? Rourke answered before she did. Mine. The room looked at him. He kept his eyes on the display. Single operator insertion. No large signature. No overt rescue package. She goes dark. She moves through the old literal shaft north of Shore Point Echo, climbs the ridgeline, links with Blue Team, and gets them to chalk line. Dalton stared. That's 9 clicks over broken rock in a storm into a live ambush. 8.2, Mara said, already checking her gear. If the shaft isn't collapsed. Dalton ignored her. One operator doesn't pull 5 wounded men out of the kill box. One operator might get to them without alerting the entire district. And if she can't, Rourke looked at him, then finally, then your men die where they are, and we will all know we chose caution over chance. Silence. Dalton's mouth tightened. I should be going. Rourke said, You're needed here to command the package if a window opens. The truth sat underneath that. Dalton was too visible, too important, too tied to his team's hierarchy to vanish on an off-book infiltration. Mara was not. Mara occupied that gray operational category reserved for people whose names moved through paperwork only when everything had already gone wrong. Dalton shifted his focus to her. The skepticism was still there, but now it had to make room for arithmetic. What's your load? Light, she said. What's your support? None that won't get heard. What's your kill authority? Rourke answered. Hostile forces obstructing recovery. Dalton stepped closer until only the table separated them. Hale is not going to like taking movement direction from someone outside his chain. Mara met him evenly. Then he can argue after I stop the bleeding. Something changed in his face then. Not acceptance, recognition, of competence, maybe, or of the fact that once a situation crossed a certain threshold, pride became administrative. He unclipped a folded paper map from his chest rig and slapped it on the table. These are Blue Team's hand marks from the last terrain walk. 2 dry wells here and here. Stone lip here with good cover. Canal depth is deeper on the west half than it looked from overhead. Mara memorized it in seconds. Dalton jabbed at a point near the ridge. If Hale's alive, he'll try to pin the enemy and hold the center. Mercer will be treating whoever went down. Don't expect them to move on first contact. They'll assume relief is a fantasy. It usually is, Mara said. He almost answered, thought better of it, and pulled a spare encrypted earbud from his kit. Take this. Blue Team subnet. Limited range. She took it. His next words came lower. My father told me once there are operators who win by violence and operators who win by geometry. He said the dangerous ones understand both. Don't make me regret which kind he thought you were. Mara fitted the earbud under her headset. Then tell Hale to listen when I say move. At the pad, the storm had reached the island in full. Rain didn't fall so much as angle across the floodlights in silver sheets. A fast boat ride was already off the table. The surf on the rock line would smash a hull and announce itself doing it. So Mara took the uglier option. A small black utility craft, barely more than an engine wrapped in radar discipline, dropped her 2 kilometers short of Shore Point Echo and peeled away without lights. She came in prone under a poncho over the kit, one hand on the grab line, salt spray knifing in her cheek every time the bow cut down. The coast of Karife rose ahead as a broken wall. No welcoming beach, just jagged shelf, surge channels, and a slit between 2 rock fins that looked too narrow until you were committed to it. The coxswain never raised his voice. 30 seconds. Mara checked her weapon one last time. Suppressed 11.5-inch carbine with thermal clip-on forward of the optic. Sidearm. Compact, breaching charge. 3 extra liters of water she would hate later but need before dawn. Rope. Medical kit. Laser marker. 1 small loitering micro-drone with maybe 12 useful minutes in this wind if it didn't die immediately. She was traveling light only by the standards of people who measured bad ideas professionally. 10. The surf boomed against the shelf. Engine dropped. The craft drifted in the lee of the rock. Go. She was over the side before the word finished, boots hitting water to mid-thigh. Then stone. Cold surged through her pants. She caught the bow once to steady the boat off the rock and shoved away. By the time she straightened, the craft had vanished into rain and engine noise, and the coast was just coast again, indifferent and sharp. Shore Point Echo smelled of brine, kelp, and old minerals, the scent of places water had been grinding for centuries longer than men had been naming them. Mara moved fast along the black shelf, knees bent, rifle inboard, letting lightning far inland give her just enough intermittent geometry to orient without using light. 40 meters north, half hidden behind a curtain of hanging salt grass and broken limestone, she found the shaft entrance exactly where an 1898 colonial survey had suggested it might be. Most people trusted satellites more than dead Empire paperwork. Mara had learned long ago that old maps sometimes matter precisely because nobody living bothered with them. She slipped inside. The shaft was narrower than the scan estimate, the first 10 meters descending at a punishing angle through wet stone polished smooth by years of trickling runoff. The air cooled immediately, damp and mineral, and close enough to carry the smell of bat guano somewhere deeper in. She slung her rifle, switched to a dim red penlight under her palm, and started climbing inland. 2 minutes in, the world of rain and wind and sea vanished behind her. Now there was only breath, stone, and controlled pain. The tunnel was not man-made all the way through. Parts of it had been carved. Yes, tool marks still visible at shoulder height where ancient masons had widened the natural fissure into a usable passage. Other parts were raw fracture, broken shells of limestone sharp enough to slice gloves. Once, she had a belly through a choke point with her kit scraping rock top and bottom, chest barely expanding until she exhaled hard and dragged herself through on forearms. At 0116, halfway in, Kim's voice crackled softly in her ear. Mara, you reading? Reading. We got one burst from Blue Team. Mercer said 2 urgent surgical, 1 Kia, probable, ammo critical. Any movement. Enemy consolidating upper south shoulder. We count at least 16 with more intermittent. Jammer source likely on the terrace line east of the canal. That fit. Of course it fit. Kim continued. There's something else. I backtraced the suppressed intercepts. Pike didn't just omit them. He retagged them under logistics traffic. Mara kept moving. Mistake or intent? I don't know. You do. Static. Then, quietly, intent feels more honest. Mara ducked beneath a jag of stone and emerged into a wider cavity where groundwater had once cut a round chamber high enough to stand. She checked her DAGR. Her blue dot crawled beneath the ridge exactly as projected. Keep digging, Mara said. Don't accuse him yet. You think I'm wrong? I think if he's feeding them, he'll feel pressure now. Pressure makes people hurry. Understood. She killed the transmission and listened. Deep inside mountain spaces, sound lied differently. It didn't tell you where a thing was. It told you a shape the void preferred. Somewhere ahead, very faint, she heard metal on rock. Not random. Rhythmic enough to be human. She killed the light and waited. Nothing. She moved again, slower. The tunnel opened 23 minutes later behind a shelf of collapsed terrace wall 600 meters northeast of Wadi 7. Mara eased through broken stones into a world washed charcoal by storm and weak starlight. Rain had thinned to mist. Wind still drove from the coast, carrying fine grit and the far-off hammering of automatic fire. She dropped prone behind the stones and brought the thermal optic up. The canal lay below like an incision through pale earth. Blue Team was where Dalton had predicted, center-west oppression, huddled around deeper cover near a stone lip. 5 heat shapes, one very still, one smaller because Mercer was folded over someone working, Hale and another shooter alternating controlled fire toward the south exit. Enemy signatures ringed the higher ground in staggered arcs, at least 14 visible from this angle, likely more masked by rock. On the east terrace shoulder, she spotted the jammer setup. Vehicle battery, folding mast, improvised amplifier housing, 2 guards. There are also bodies, already more than either side wanted. Mara arranged the nearest machine gun nest at 612 meters. Crosswind from left, gusting 8 to 12 by vegetation movement, lower in the canal. Elevation minimal. She settled behind the rifle, loaded her breathing, and let the scene simplify itself the way hard problems do when you stop resenting them. A flashback came then, the kind she hated because it arrived without asking. Not of combat, of a kitchen in Virginia 20 years earlier. Her father teaching her to align a dented compass over a paper map while rain hit the windows. Don't chase the needle, Mara. Build a picture first. The needle only confirms what you already know. Back in the present, she exhaled half, held, and pressed. The first guard at the jammer dropped without drama. Before the second could register, she shifted one body width, pressed again, and the man spun into the battery case. Sparks showered in a bright thermal bloom. The mast dipped. Down in the canal, Mercer looked up at the sudden silence from the east shoulder just as Hale keyed his mic. Unknown friendly fires East Ridge. Unknown friendly fires East Ridge. Mara clicked into the subnet Dalton had given her. Not unknown. Vance. Hold center. Mark your wounded. 3 beats of silence. Then Mercer, incredulous even while under fire. Chief? Hale came in hard and skeptical. Authenticate. Tell Dalton his contour notes were accurate and his south well is dry. A pause. Short. Necessary. Hale answered, authenticate. Good, Mara said. You move when I say. Not before. Another machine gun opened from the south lip. She shifted, found muzzle flash through thermal wash, and put 1 round through the gun shield gap. The weapon stopped. Mercer whispered something that might have been prayer or surprise. Mara scanned. Enemy signatures were reacting now, bunching wrong. Try to locate a shooter from impact rather than sound because the suppressor and the wind were buying her seconds. Seconds were a currency she spent carefully. Hail, she said, status. 1 Kia. Chief Lewis. 2 liter if we had one. Mercer managing. Ammo low. How low? Me and Briggs 1 mag, each plus partials. Mercer working off fumes. Copy. You're not filling south. No argument here. That meant Dalton had done his job. Or the canyon had. Mara shifted again as 2 enemy fighters broke from the terraces and moved low along the canal edge, trying to close on Hale's flank. She tracked the lead man, fired, cycled, fired again. Both went down in almost the same place. Dust lifted around them. The second man's rifle slid over the edge and vanished into the cut. Left flank clear for now, she said. Mercer came up. Chief, if that's the only east shelf, I owe you 3 batteries and a month of coffee. Keep your head down and save the coffee. Briggs, another SEAL she had met only once in a training lane, sounded hoarse on the net. We thought you were a drone. Stay disappointed. That brought a breath of nervous laughter, the kind that keeps shock from taking root. Then a rocket-propelled grenade hit the west wall above them and filled the canal with rock dust. Hale coughed. Correction. We have movement on both north shoulders now. They know we got help. Of course they did. Mara lowered behind cover as rounds snapped over the terrace stones, enemy finally shooting toward her approximate sector. One clipped a rock edge and sprayed her cheek with grit. She ignored it. In the operations center, Kim had re-established a thin uplink through the partial jammer degradation. Her voice slipped into Mara's ear. We've got maybe 7 more enemy signatures moving from compound direction. Truck left Al-Qadar 20 minutes ago. Unknown if Valles aboard. Direction of movement. Toward inland road. Not toward you. So the engineer was moving while blue team was fixed. Diversion and objective split. That made sense. It also meant the ambush had a clock behind it. Someone only spent that many men to pin a rescue if something more valuable was rolling away. Rourke came over the line. Mara, can you break contact and hold Hale until secondary package launches? She knew the colonel already knew the answer. Negative. If I hold, they get mortared or overrun. We move now or not at all. A beat. Understood. Dalton's voice followed, stripped of all prior friction. Chief, Hale's your tactical. She answered copy. The words mattered. Not because they changed who she was, because they changed what everyone else would accept from her next. She launched the micro-drone from behind cover. It bucked once in the wind, steadied, then crawled low over the canal on electric rotors too quiet to matter in the storm residue. Feed hit her tablet in grainy thermal. More signatures than she'd seen from the shelf. 19 enemy total around the basin, with at least 4 shifting to cut the north cut. Too fast. Hale, she said, they're reading chalk line. His answer came instantly. Leak? Maybe. Doesn't matter. We improvise. Mercer said, that's my favorite phrase after severe blood loss. Mara was already marking 2 points on the terrain overlay. New route. 50 meters north of chalk line, there's a collapsed irrigation run under the terrace break. Single file, low profile, exits west behind the salt fold. Briggs sounded dubious. You found that from screen? Found it from a map, Deadman, made before your grandparents were born. Move when I break the east shoulder. Hill didn't waste time on disbelief. How long? 30 seconds to create confusion. 90 to get your casualties moving. That's not enough. It's what we have. She switched magazines, checked wind, and then did the harder thing. She stopped shooting the easy targets and started shaping behavior. First round hit a fuel can near the abandoned technical east of the canal. The can ruptured, not exploding in a movie blossom, but spraying burning liquid into brush and tarp. Fire crawled sideways. Men shouted. 2 enemy fighters turned to beat it down because panic and instinct outran tactics. Second and third rounds went into the rock directly above the battery cluster she had already crippled. Stone broke loose, showering the terrace lip and convincing everyone on that shoulder they were taking plunging fire from a second angle. Then she fired at the canal's far north rim, not to hit but to herd. Dust bursts walked across the ridge in a line that made the enemy choose between advancing into uncertainty or shifting to cover. They shifted. Good. Hale, move now. Blue team moved. Mercer and Briggs dragged Lewis's body first 2 meters before Hale snapped. Leave him. The word nearly tore something open in the net. Then the two wounded. One with a leg that no longer bent correctly. One barely conscious. Hale and Briggs half-carried, half-pulled. Mercer kept one hand on a shoulder strap and one on a bandage. Somehow, both medic and mule at once. Enemy fire surged from the south lip, then from northwest, as two fighters realized the movement vector. Mara dropped one at 340 meters as he rose to fire downhill. The second disappeared behind stone. She advanced 5 meters left along the terrace, staying low. A round crack passed, so close it punched her hood backward. Another hit the rock where her knee had been. She ignored both, found the second shooter through thermal shimmer, and shot him through the clavicle as he leaned. He tumbled into the cut. Below, blue team reached the broken terrace wall, marking the new route. From above, it looked like nothing but collapsed agriculture. From ground level, it was a dark slot beneath rubble, just wide enough if the casualties were shoved rather than guided. Hale, Mara said, you have 20 seconds before the south shoulder regains cohesion. Mercer, Briggs, push. Mercer grunted with effort. On it. Then a new voice hit the net. Not blue team. Wrong cadence. Wrong encryption profile forcing itself through the damage channel in digital fragments. North break. Cut them there. Mara froze. Kim came alive in her ear. Mara, the transmission did not originate local. It bounced through our relay. Pike, she thought immediately, or someone with access equal to his. Hale, they have your out, she said. Faster. Blue team disappeared one by one into the collapse. Mara rose into a crouch and sprinted downslope. Not because it was safe, because her angle from the terrace was closing and she needed to own the choke point before the enemy did. The shale underfoot moved treacherously, sliding beneath her boots in thin sheets. Halfway down, she cut right behind a limestone knob as rounds shredded the brush she had occupied 2 seconds earlier. She kept moving. 40 meters. 30. 15. Breath tight. Heart controlled. Rifle tucked high. At the canal floor, the world changed from big-picture geometry to dust, blood, close stone, and the hot copper smell of men keeping themselves alive by effort alone. Mercer saw her first as she dropped into the slot beside them. His eyes went wide behind dirty lenses. You actually came. Mara scanned, counted, assessed. Hale, blood on left sleeve, but mobile. Briggs, scraped and steady. One casualty, Lewis, dead, zip tied to his plate drag handle by mercy and necessity. One wounded with chest trauma, breathing wet. One with a femur injury, splinted ugly, but functional for drag only. Mercer himself bleeding through the thigh. I said move, she said. That is not the reaction I hoped for. Then improve your expectations. Hale was staring at the route ahead, then at her. Up close in the dark, he looked less like an officer and more like what he was, a tired man carrying too many decisions. You were right about the terraces. Not useful now. No, he said, but true. The slot ahead was barely a tunnel, more a crushed vein under the old wall, packed with stone and wind-blown dirt. Mara dropped to one knee, pulled a small infrared chem marker from her kit, cracked it, and wedged it where only their nods would catch the glow. Single file. Wounded first. Quiet until quiet is impossible. Briggs looked over his shoulder. We got maybe 60 seconds before they collapse on this position. Then we should stop talking. Mara took rear security as blue team pushed into the slot. Enemy voices were louder now, descending the canal edges, agitated, confident, still not understanding how many friendlies opposed them. Good. Confusion bought life. She keyed her mic once. Rourke, contact made. Moving blue team north by improvised route. Minimum 3 litter problem without litters. They will not outrun pursuit. Rourke answered, copy. Dalton came over him. Chief. Hale. Hale answered, breathless as he shoved the chest-wounded man ahead. Go. Bring them home. No speeches. No promises. Just the thing commanders say when they know orders have run out and character is all that remains. The slot narrowed until even Mara had to turn sideways. Stones scraped her plates. Once they had to pass Lewis's body hand over hand because the dead do not help in tight spaces and still demand respect. Mercer's breathing went ragged. The wounded man with a leg injury bit down on a strap to keep from making noise. Dust clung to sweat. Every surface was cold, abrasive, and older than any battle happening inside it. Halfway through, Mara halted, so suddenly Briggs nearly stepped back into her. What? She held up a fist. Above them, muffled but distinct boots. Not random searching. Moving parallel. The enemy had seen enough of the terrain to guess the hidden line. Maybe locals. Maybe pre-planned. Either way, they were racing the route. Mara leaned close to Hale's ear. When this exits, it opens into a bowl under the salt fold. If they beat us to the west lip, we're pinned again. Hale whispered, options. 2. We keep moving and try speed. Or I go forward, take the lip, and buy you passage. Alone. Yes. Mercer, overhearing despite himself, muttered, this night just keeps getting less attractive. Hale looked at Mara in the dark, reading something there beyond the plan. If you go, you may not make it back to the fold. If I stay, your wounded definitely don't. That was the mathematics no one needed explained. He made the decision in one controlled breath. Take Briggs. No, need him on the drag line. Chief, you want everyone through, Lieutenant, then stop solving the wrong problem. For a moment, the tunnel held only breathing and grit. Then Hale nodded once. Mara slipped past them, moving low and fast toward the exit seam where colder air leaked through the stones. She paused just before the opening, brought the thermal up, and looked. The salt fold beyond was a pale, shallow basin crusted white under broken cloud, ringed by low rock shelves and thorn brush. 200 meters west lay the seam leading down toward the literal extraction zone she had planned. Right now it was empty. Then 3 enemy signatures rose on the west lip almost together, arriving from the parallel track above. Not empty anymore. She backed one step into the tunnel and spoke without turning. Change of plan. They're already there. Hale's voice came from the darkness behind her. How many? 3 on lip. More coming. And someone fed them this route in real time. No one answered that because the truth landed too heavily to share by whisper. Mara checked her remaining magazines, listened to enemy boots crunch salt above the basin, and felt the whole mission change shape in her hands. This was no longer just a rescue through bad terrain. Someone on the inside was steering the trap, step by step, correcting for her as she moved, which meant the next contact would not be reactive. It would be waiting. She settled behind the exit stones, centered her sight on the first silhouette cresting the lip, and said the only thing left to say. Now we find out who's been talking. The first man on the west lip came up low, rifle angled down into the basin, expecting wounded men and easy work. Mara shot him through the throat. He dropped backward without a sound loud enough to matter. The second spun toward the movement he thought he'd seen, and she took him just under the eye before his weapon cleared the rock. The third had better instincts. He dove flat, rolled behind a shale tooth, and started shouting into a handheld. Mara shifted 6 inches, caught the edge of his shoulder as he leaned to transmit, and fired again. He folded over the radio, voice cut off in a burst of static. Behind her, inside the narrow stone slot, Hale didn't waste the opening. Move, he snapped. Blue team pushed the casualties forward. Mercer shoved from the rear, boots grinding on salt and broken rock, one hand on the drag strap of the chest-wounded man, the other clamped to his own thigh where blood had soaked into fabric and turned black in the dark. Lewis came next, their dead carry because some lines did not move just because the math got worse. Mara climbed out of the slot and onto the basin's eastern rim, forcing the enemy to read a bigger picture than the one in front of them. Wind skated loose, salt across the ground in pale ribbons. Broken clouds moved fast overhead, letting moonlight through in cold pieces that turned the basin white, then gray, then white again. She brought the thermal optic up and saw the pursuit spreading exactly as she expected, 2 men dropping toward the basin from the north shoulder, 3 more moving lower and wider to cut west, and another cluster halting on a ridge while they tried to identify whether they were chasing 5 survivors or walking into a larger force. Make them choose wrong, she thought. She fired into the rock 20 meters south of her actual position. Dust kicked high. One enemy group shifted to cover the false line. She moved right, dropped to one knee, and put a round into the lead pursuer as he crossed open ground. His partner froze. Wrong response. Mara shot him too. In her ear, Kim's voice returned, thin but clear now that the worst of the jammer was dead. I have confirmation. Mara kept scanning. Say it. Pike is the leak. Back on Marrow Key, the operations center had gone quiet in the dangerous way rooms do when truth arrives all at once. Naomi Kim stood at her station with one hand locked around a headset and the other braced on the table, replaying the packet trace on the screen for the second time. Lines of data hopped from Blue Team's damaged emergency relay through a maintenance node, then through a low-priority bandwidth lane Pike had reclassified under humanitarian communications. From there, the bursts vanished into a microwave repeater on the mainland that Brass Crescent had been using for weeks. Not accidental. Not sloppy. Intentional. Commander Dalton saw it and understood it immediately. He turned very slowly toward Adrian Pike. The civilian liaison had backed one half step away from the main console without realizing he'd done it. His collar was still neat. His face was not. You're reading context as intent, he said. That path was a collection channel. I was tracking secondary movement. Kim didn't look at him. You retag hostile traffic around Wadi 7 as civilian logistics. Then you routed rescue route changes through a compromised lane after the ambush started. You didn't just miss the trap. You kept feeding it. Pike's eyes flicked once to the door, measuring distance. Dalton saw that too. Rourke spoke before anyone moved. Don't. Pike lifted both hands a few inches, the gesture of a man trying to remain administrative while the floor disappeared under him. Colonel, if you freeze me out of this room right now, you burn 6 months of work. Carey wasn't the prize. He was the bridge. We had a buyer chain forming offshore, foreign procurement, insurance shell fronts, shipping registry fraud. Velez was supposed to bring us to the full network. Dalton's voice came low and level. So you sold my team for patience. I protected a strategic access operation. You fed them our routes. I fed likely movement to contain the engagement and hold eyes on Carey until a broader interdiction package. Dalton hit him. It wasn't theatrical. Just one short, brutal strike that drove Pike sideways into the comms rack and dropped him to a knee. Security inside the room surged 2 steps too late. Rourke never raised his voice. That's enough. Dalton stood over Pike with murder so controlled it looked colder than anger. One of my men is dead. Pike pressed a hand to his mouth, found blood, and looked almost offended by it. If you think this war is won by rescuing every team that walks into a box, you don't understand the scale of what we were close to. Rourke moved in then, took Pike's badge himself, and placed him face first against the table. You made an unauthorized risk decision with U.S. personnel in contact. You concealed hostile indications. You transmitted friendly movement over a compromised relay. Whatever scale you thought you were playing at, it's over. Pike twisted once, more desperate now than smooth. Carey is heading to Ras Camel Battery. If you spook him, he fires what he has and burns the coast. That sight is hardened. He only goes there if he knows his mainland route is blown. Kim's head snapped up. Ras Camel is 1.2 clicks north of Echo. Rourke looked straight at her. Patch Mara, in a salt basin. Mara listened while the wind pulled at her hood and the dead man at her feet cooled into the ground. Pike is compromised, Kim said. He admits he held traffic to protect a wider operation. He says Carey is moving Dr. Velez and at least part of the missile package to Ras Camel Battery. Mara closed her eyes once. Ras Camel, old coastal artillery site on a basalt horn above the sea. Built decades before radar made fixed guns obsolete, then reused in every war after because old positions remained good positions. She had seen it on a survey overlay that afternoon and discarded it only because it sat too far west of the relay station to matter to a clean exfil. Nothing was clean now. How far from our current position? Kim answered immediately. 1.4 clicks west-northwest as the ground breaks. Closer if you know the old cable trench. Mara did know the trench. A disused service line that once hauled ammunition from the shore to the battery. Half collapsed, mostly forgotten, hidden from aerial view by overhang and thorn scrub. Another dead map artifact. Another ghost corridor. She looked over her shoulder. Hale had gotten the team through the slot and into the basin floor. Mercer was down on one knee beside the chest-wounded operator, fingers moving under red-filtered light, so dim was almost memory. Briggs had taken rear security, weapon tracking the ridge line, while Lewis's body lay wrapped in a drag sling made from straps and necessity. Status, Mara called quietly. Hale moved to her side. Up close, his breathing was controlled but heavy, his face gray beneath dust and sweat. West path is open for maybe a minute. Beyond that, unknown. Mara kept her eyes on the ridge. Carey's not running inland. He's going to harass Camel Battery. Hale frowned. Why? Because if the mainland route is burned, the coast is his leverage. Launch one anti-ship missile, even a partial system, and every ship within range has to take him seriously. Briggs muttered, "He can fire one of those things tonight?" "Maybe not well," Mara said. "Maybe not twice. Once is enough." Mercer looked up from the wounded man. "Then the CX-Fill is dead if he gets there first." "That's the point." Hale's jaw tightened. "Our mission is getting my people out." "It is," Mara said. "And if Carey arms a launcher over the water, nobody comes in to get you." That settled over them harder than the wind. The chest-wounded SEAL coughed wetly. Mercer leaned back over him, found the catheter by touch, and decompressed the chest with practiced speed. A hiss escaped. The man dragged in a better breath, then another. Mercer's hands were red to the wrist. "You've got maybe 45 minutes before he crashes again," the medic said without looking up. "Leg wound can move if we drag him smooth." I'm decorative damage." Mara ignored that. "How much ammo?" Hale, check fast. Me, 1 full and 12 loose. Briggs, 1 full. Mercer, pistol and scraps. You, enough if I stop wasting it. Briggs glanced toward the west. "You're thinking intercept." Mara was. She hated that she was. The clean answer was always the one that kept the wounded moving and left the strategic problem to someone larger, louder, later. But Ras Camel sat above the only practical extraction seam on this stretch of coast. If Carey reached it with Valles and even one functioning tube, then every RHIB, every helicopter, every ship that came close would do so under the shadow of a guided weapon nobody in the area had briefed for tonight. Early in her career, Mara would have solved the nearest problem first and trusted someone else to solve the next one. Age had taught her that nearest and most dangerous were rarely the same thing. "Hale," she said, "there's a brine cistern 300 meters west under the salt fold. Stone cap, low signature, defensible for 10 minutes, maybe 15. You get the wounded and Lewis there with Mercer. Then you and Briggs come with me." Mercer looked up sharply. "I don't love being assigned to the hole. You're hit. I can still shoot. I need you keeping 2 men alive." He held her gaze for one beat and understood the real assignment beneath the words. "Guard the wounded. Guard the dead. Hold until called." "Fine." Hale looked at the basin, the ridge, then back at Mara. "And if this intercept goes wrong?" "It probably will." That wasn't the question. Mara glanced once at Lewis's covered form, then at the 2 men still breathing because the night hadn't finished with them yet. "If it goes wrong, you take whoever can move and use the cable trench down to the coast. There's a blind notch above Echo that stays masked from the battery. You mark IR only at the last possible second." Hale studied her face. "You've built this in your head already." "No," Mara said. "I'm building it now." He gave the slightest nod. A professional surrender of ownership, not of will. "Then let's move." They crossed the basin in short bursts, bent low beneath the wind. Salt crunched under boots. Thorn brush scraped plate carriers and sleeves with dry, brittle whispers. Mara arranged the western fold twice. Then again, trusting distance only after 3 confirmations because wind and exhaustion made lazy liars of the eyes. The brine cistern appeared exactly where the old survey said it would. a circular stone mouth roofed by collapsed beams encrusted white around the lip, as if the earth itself had sweated out old seawater and left the salt behind. Inside, the chamber was shoulder-deep at the center, dry now except for mud stains and mineral streaks. Not good. Good enough. Mercer and Briggs lowered the casualties in first. Hale and Mara slid Lewis in last, careful with the body even now because the living were watching. Inside the cistern, the air was colder and still. It smelled like wet limestone, iron, old algae, and the sharp medicinal sting of Mercer's kit as he opened packets with his teeth. The medic cut away more fabric from his own thigh, packed the wound one-handed, and then turned right back to the man with the chest trauma. "You pass out, I'll hate you," he muttered to the casualty. The man managed a breath that might have been a laugh. Mara crouched by the entrance and keyed the net. "Rourke, we're at temporary hold west of the fold. Need everything you have on Ras Camel." Kim answered instead, uploading a historical layout now. Main battery platform on the seaward face. Lower magazine tunnels. One old generator room. One cable trench from shore, partially collapsed. Thermal last month showed intermittent occupancy. Probably smugglers using the lower bays. Any current eyes. Storm broke enough for one drone pass. Feed is rough. Mara's tablet updated with grainy thermal blocks. She enlarged the image. Ras Camel sat on a basalt spine, jutting into the sea like a knuckle. The battery proper was a crescent of broken concrete gun pits and rusted rails. The old artillery removed long ago. New heat sources dotted the upper platform. 2 vehicles, one larger. Several clustered human signatures around a long rectangular object under tarp. Another heat source in the old fire control room. More movement in the lower approach. He'll lean close. Count. 11 confirmed. Maybe more under overhang. Briggs let out a breath through his nose. That's a lot for 3 rifles and a medic in a hole. Mercer didn't look up. "I'm choosing to hear respect." Kim came again. "There's one more thing. Valles is active. We caught short-range emissions from a diagnostic unit near the platform. She's working on something. She's keeping it alive or breaking it." Hale asked. Mara watched the thermal blur around the long object. "If she's smart, both." Back on Marrow Key, Pike was zip-cuffed to a support post under armed guard, but his voice still carried across the room when he chose his moment. "You're all making the same mistake," he said, blood dried dark at the edge of one nostril. "You think Carey wants a battlefield success. He wants a negotiation position. If he can demonstrate launch capability, he buys exit routes, prisoner trades, media amplification, the whole spectacle. He won't destroy the engineer before he needs her." Dalton kept his back to him. "That's supposed to comfort me. It's supposed to keep you from charging the battery blind." Rourke finally turned. "Why Ras Camel?" Pike looked at the screen as if he still belonged in front of it. "Because the old battery has hardened sea-facing arcs and direct line of sight to the shipping corridor. Because the launch rails can be adapted fast. Because once he's there, every rescue package becomes a target package." Kim asked how long to get one missile operational. Pike hesitated. That was enough to anger Dalton again. "Say it. 40 minutes if Valles cooperates," Pike said. "Longer if she doesn't." Rourke checked the clock, then the feed. "She doesn't strike me as cooperative." "No," Pike said quietly. "She doesn't." In the cistern, Mara made the decision and felt it settle into place with the cold weight of inevitability. "Hale Briggs with me." Mercer looked up at that. "You're really doing this?" Mara checked the suppressor, then her sidearm. "If Carey gets the launcher on the rail, you'll hear about it all the way down here." Mercer tied off his bandage hard enough to make himself grimace. "Then let me at least give you something useful." He dug into a side pouch and handed her a compact roll of silver foil. "Hypothermia wrap. Tear strips. Reflective enough to spoof cheap thermal if you hang it wrong." Briggs raised an eyebrow. "You carry that for bullets. I carry it for people. Try not to bleed on my inventory." Mara tucked the wrap away. Hale was already studying the tablet. "Cable trench approaches from south-southeast. If they expect us, they'll cover the upper mouth." "Then we don't use the upper mouth," Mara said. She zoomed deeper, tracing a broken line in the rock. There's a service culvert here tied to the old generator exhaust. Too narrow for moving crates. Wide enough for a human who doesn't mind bad decisions. Briggs exhaled. That's us then. Before they left, Hale crouched beside Lewis. He didn't say anything. He just adjusted the sling so the dead man's head was no longer resting against bare stone. Then he stood and fell in behind Mara. They moved west under a sky that had finally begun to clear in the east, though dawn was still distant enough to be only a thought. The ground changed underfoot from salt crust to volcanic grit, darker and sharper, with low wind-carved ridges that broke silhouettes but punished ankles. Below them, the sea worked the cliffs in long black surges. Every few seconds, white water showed for a moment, then vanished again. Mara took them through a dead wash, then up along the lee side of a basalt spine where the wind dropped and sound traveled farther. Somewhere ahead, an engine idled at low RPM. Not vehicle movement. Generator. Ras Camel announced itself first by smell, diesel, hot metal, and the acidic bite of battery fluid. Then by shape. A hulking dark mass against the star-paled horizon. All ruined military geometry and newer additions bolted onto old war. They halted beneath a low overhang 70 meters short of the lower works. Through thermal, Mara saw a sentry on the half-collapsed cable platform, another by the lower tunnel mouth, and intermittent movement higher on the launch deck. "Ale," she whispered, "you take lower tunnel with Briggs. Quiet if possible. If not fast. Hold below the platform until you hear me open. And you." She pointed to the exhaust culvert above and behind the battery line. "I go up." Briggs muttered. "Of course you do." Mara passed Hale the last fragment of her plan. "If Valles is conscious and moving, she'll try to sabotage the guidance package, not the motor. A smart engineer breaks the brain before the muscle." Hale looked at her. "You know that from experience." "I know it from war." She left them there and climbed. The culvert was worse than the shaft beneath Shore Point Echo, because this one was made by men who assumed maintenance would always be done by someone desperate and underpaid. Concrete throat, rusted ladder stubs, rat droppings and old oil, heat lingering in the walls from intermittent generator use. Mara had to sling her rifle to her back and pull herself on elbows through the last vertical bend, plates scraping so hard she felt the vibration in her teeth. At the grate, she paused and looked through. The upper platform of Ras Camel spread before her in hard angles and salt-stained concrete. The old artillery pit now converted into an improvised launch site. One anti-ship missile tube had already been mounted at a shallow seaward angle on a crude rail assembly welded to an old turntable plate. A second tube still lay on supports nearby. Open crates showed gyroscopic units, cable bundles, coolant bottles, and a guidance interface panel whose casing still carried stenciled numbers from a foreign manufacturer too careful to acknowledge where its hardware had wandered. Dr. Samura Velez stood at the rail in civilian clothes under a borrowed field jacket, risk-free now because technical labor mattered more than restraint. She looked thinner than in her dossier, cheek hollowed, hair cut short with what looked like a knife, left leg still carrying the old repaired injury. But she was standing. More important, she was working slowly in the exact way competent people work when they're buying time without wanting anyone to notice. Nasser Carey stood beside her. He was lean, composed, and older than the grainy files had suggested, beard silvering at the chin, posture too erect for a mere smuggler. Former artillery or engineer corps, Mara guessed. Men who understood range tables never quite lost the way they looked at horizons. He wore a headset and held himself like someone used to being obeyed, even by armed fanatics. Around the platform, Mara counted 9 more hostiles. 2 near the mounted tube, 2 on the seaward parapet with rifles covering the approaches, 1 at the generator room door, 2 by the second vehicle, 1 with a radio near the old fire control post, 1 walking a short orbit around Velez, too close to ignore. Carey said something in Arabic. Mara understood enough to catch the important part. Alignment complete in 3 minutes. Velez answered in accented Arabic, voice flat with fatigue. 3 if you wanted to leave the rail. 7 if you wanted to hit anything. Carey almost smiled. Tonight, Departure is the message. So Pike had been right about that much. Spectacle first. Negotiation second. Mara eased the grate loose by millimeters and brought the rifle through. The wind on the platform was stronger than below, coming off the water in erratic slaps. Bad for precision. Good for hiding small sounds. In her ear, Hale's whisper came from the lower tunnel. In position. 1 sentry down, quiet. Briggs with me. Stand by. She kept watching Velez. The engineer's fingers moved over the interface panel with the detached precision of someone doing violence through decimals. She seated one connector, rejected another, adjusted a gyroscope housing a fraction too far, then corrected herself just enough not to draw attention. At one point, she let a calibration probe slip from her hand. The guard by her shoulder stooped to pick it up. She thanked him with such genuine exhaustion that he bought the performance. Good, Mara thought. Keep them close. Close men die faster. The first shot took the guard beside Velez at the base of the skull. Before the body hit concrete, Mara shifted and dropped the radio man near the fire control post. Hale opened from below, a heartbeat later, his first burst taking the sentry at the lower tunnel mouth. Briggs cutting the second man on the cable platform before he found his footing. The battery exploded into motion. Carey moved instantly, not freezing like lesser men. He shoved Velez sideways behind the mounted tube and drew a pistol from beneath his jacket. One fighter sprinted for the second vehicle. Another dove behind the generator housing and began spraying blind toward the lower tunnel. The 2 men on the parapet turned inward too late. Mara shot one through the chest as he rose. The second disappeared below the parapet line. Platform engage, Hale snapped. 3 down lower. More movement inside. Mara kicked the grate free and dropped onto the platform from behind the exhaust stack. This was the moment title lines were born from, though nobody inside them ever thought in those terms. To the men on the battery, she was just suddenly there, appearing from a place they had not covered, moving through steam and diesel heat with a suppressed carbine already speaking in tight, ugly syllables. One shot into the generator gunner's shoulder, spinning him off balance. Another into the man reaching the vehicle door. A third across the old gun pit, as someone tried to climb the rail supports and found only air. Velez looked up from behind the mounted tube and saw Mara for the first time. Mara didn't waste words. Can it fire? Not accurately. Velez snapped back. Yet is bad. Then stop him. Carey was already moving toward the fire control room with 2 remaining escorts, heading not for escape, but for the hardwired trigger circuits that bypass parts of the alignment routine. He knew he no longer needed a clean shot. He needed launch. Mara sprinted. Rounds cracked across the platform, one slamming sparks off the rail beside her. Hale and Briggs came out of the lower works on her left, weapons up, pinning the parapet and generator door. One fighter burst from a magazine tunnel with an RPG over one shoulder and died under Briggs's fire before he got the tube level. Mara slid behind the mounted missile rail and came up on the far side inside Velez's little universe of cable bundles, coolant lines, and improvised launch hardware. Tell me how to kill it, she said. Velez was breathing hard, eyes bright with exhaustion and fury. Euro stack here. Guidance bus here. If he gets to the backup panel in the fire control room, he can force ignition and send it out over the water blind. Maybe it misses by kilometers. Maybe it doesn't. How long? Less than a minute if he knows the bypass. Carey knew the bypass. Mara could read that in the way he had chosen his path. She slapped a fresh magazine home and keyed the net. Hale, keep the platform. Briggs with me. Hale didn't argue. Go. Briggs vaulted the low parapet and landed beside her, breathing like a machine under load. Lead. They cut across the upper battery in a storm of short fire and flying concrete fragments. The fire control room sat half sunken into the rock, old observation slits now boxed with newer steel plates, and a patch cable run crawling into the wall like a vein. One of Carey's escorts leaned from the doorway and fired. Mara dropped flat. The round snapped over her shoulder. Briggs answered with 2 fast shots that drove the man back inside screaming. Mara was up first. She hit the doorway on the left edge, shouldered through smoke and dust, and entered into stale heat old maps peeled from walls, and the smell of ozone from energized electronics. Carrie was at the backup panel exactly where she had feared, one hand on a hardwired switch assembly, pistol in the other. His remaining escort swung toward the breach. Mara shot him through the sternum and kept moving. Carrie fired once. The round struck the steel edge beside her head with a flat metallic crack that stunned one ear. She drove into him before he could fire again, rifle trap between them, both of them slamming into the panel. He was stronger than he looked and better trained than most men she fought. Not special operations, but not militia either. He understood leverage. He used the wall, caught her weapon arm, tried to turn her into the switch bank while keeping the pistol between them. Mara jammed his wrist into the metal casing. The pistol went off, deafening inside the room. A panel meter shattered. Carrie spoke through clenched teeth in English now, because some men switched languages when they wanted to be fully understood. Too late. Mara drove her forehead into his nose. Something broke. He staggered. She ripped the pistol free, but he hit the manual trigger guard with his palm on the way down. Outside, alarms began to shriek from the launch rail. Launch cycle. Valessa's voice came over the platform in a raw scream. 40 seconds. Mara, the coolant interlock is open. Carrie lunged again, blood down his beard, trying not to escape now, but to hold her inside the room long enough for the countdown to outrun intervention. Mara saw it then. This whole thing had always been about forcing choices. Save the team. Save the engineer. Stop the missile. Never all at once. You integrate judgment, her father had said once on a range, so long ago she could still smell wet pine and solvent. Skill gets you to the decision. Judgment decides what deserves the bullet. Mara shot the backup panel. The room flashed with sparks. Alarms outside did not stop. Velez came back, breathless. That only killed one circuit. He armed the pneumatic release. I need hands on the rail. Mara pivoted for the door. Carrie caught her plate carrier from behind. She twisted, drove an elbow into his damaged nose, felt cartilage collapse further, then jammed the stolen pistol under his jaw and held it there. Who else? She said. He smiled through blood. You already know. Names. You think removing one man from one room changes anything. That was answer enough. She fired once and let him drop. Then she ran. On the platform, the mounted tube was beginning to vent white coolant vapor around the locking collar. The rail motor had engaged, slewing 2 degrees seaward. Velez was on one knee at the guidance bus with a screwdriver in bare hands, trying to reach a recessed connector while the wounded leg trembled under her. Hale was firing over the parapet toward the lower approach. Briggs went immediately to cover the seaward side. One hostile remained alive on the upper deck, crawling toward a dropped rifle with one leg shot out. Mara put a round through the weapon instead of the man, then reached Velez. What? Fin unlock cable, Velez snapped. Manual override engaged. If the fins deploy in the tube, motor ignition blows the whole assembly. If they stay locked, it still launches. Which is worse? That depends where you're standing. Vapor thickened. The launcher gave a hydraulic groan. Velez shoved the connector into Mara's hand. Pull this when I say. Not before. What happens if I do? It detonates the igniter battery under us. Mara knelt beside her anyway. Below them, the lower approach erupted again. Hale fired in short, disciplined bursts. More coming up the trench. 3, maybe 4. Kim's voice slashed into the net. Mara, we've got small craft moving off the coast northbound. Possibly buyer vessel. Repeat, possible buyer vessel. So that was Pike's larger operation. Carrie wasn't just posturing. He was signaling to someone offshore. Mara said, Rourke, can you hit the water? Destroyer has weapons release if Velez confirms active threat. Velez heard it and shouted toward Mara's mic without looking up. Threat is active. Rourke did not hesitate. Mark. Mara yanked the laser designator from her kit and crawled to the parapet. Offshore, beyond the black chop and the white teeth of rock, she found a moving heat source low on the water. Fast boat. No lights. Running dark and deliberate. She painted it. Mark on. Captured, Kim said. On the platform, the launcher whined louder. Now, Velez barked. Mara pulled the connector. For half a second, nothing happened. Then the guidance panel went black, came back, and began throwing fault codes across the screen. Velez drove the screwdriver under the finlock housing and torqued until metal screamed. Again, Mara ripped a second cable by hand. The battery compartment under the rail gave off a shower of sparks and a coughing burst of smoke. The tube shuddered. Somewhere deep inside the mounted missile, a relay clicked out of sequence. "Move!" Velez shouted. Mara grabbed her by the plate and hauled. The igniter battery blew not as a grand fireball, but as a brutal contained detonation that turned the rail assembly into shrapnel and flame. The mounted tube jumped on its support, split along one seam, and belched a spear of orange fire sideways into the old gun pit. Metal fragments shrieked off concrete. The shock wave hit like a door slammed by God. Mara and Velez went down hard behind the parapet. Hale took the blast on one shoulder and rolled, still somehow keeping his rifle. Briggs disappeared in smoke for a horrible second before emerging cursing and alive. The one crawling hostile on the deck stopped moving entirely. Far offshore, 3 seconds later, a destroyer-launched missile found the fast boat Mara had painted. At that distance, it registered only as a silent white flare over black water, then absence. Kim's voice came back, tight with adrenaline. "Boat is gone." Repeat, "Boat is gone." The blast had also changed the battlefield. Men below who had been climbing now thought the launcher had either fired or catastrophically cooked off. Either way, their timing was broken. Shouts rose from the lower trench, uncertain, conflicting. Some moved up, some away. Command had died with Carey, and nobody had told all the rifles at once. Mara got to one knee, head ringing. Velez was beside her, coughing into one sleeve, hands burned raw across the knuckles. "Can a second tube fire?" Mara asked. Velez looked through smoke toward the support frame where the spare missile still lay half-crated. "Not without the guidance stack I was pretending to install. So yes, eventually. No, not tonight. Good enough." Hale moved to them, blood running from a cut over one eye. "We are leaving." The platform trembled once as something lower in the magazine tunnel burned off. Concrete dust drifted down from an overhead crack. Briggs checked the trench below. Still contacts. Not organized. Mara looked at Velez's leg, at Hale's shoulder, at the old battery beginning to fail around them. "Cable trench to the cistern. Mercer brings the wounded." Then echo. Velez shook her head once, breathing hard. "I can walk." "Can you run?" "No." "Then walk fast." They moved. Hale and Briggs took point through the upper trench. Mara followed with Velez, one hand locked in the back of her jacket. Behind them, Ras Camel spat smoke and sparks into the dark, as if the old fort itself had decided to die awake. Halfway to the cistern, Kim came in again, voice steadier now, the job taking over where fear had been. "Pike is in custody. Full packet secured. He says there may be one more cell on the road south, independent from Carey's battery crew. Numbers," Mara said. "Unknown. Could be 3. Could be none." Last clean intercept was before the platform engagement. Briggs muttered ahead of them, comforting. Hale slowed just enough to let Mara come abreast. "You think Pike believed his own argument?" "Yes." "You think that matters?" "No." They reached the cistern to find Mercer exactly where she knew he'd be, kneeling in the cold mineral dark with his back to the wall, pistol in hand, watching the entrance while one wounded operator slept from exhaustion and the other floated on the edge of it. Lewis lay where they had left him, better arranged now, head supported by Mercer's folded jacket. The medic looked up as they entered, saw Velez, and exhaled through his teeth. "You brought homework." "She brought the sea back," Mara said. Mercer eyed the burns on Velez's hands. "Then she sits." Velez lowered herself to the stone with obvious pain and held those burned hands in front of her as if they belonged to somebody else. "Did the boat get away?" "No," Mara said. For the first time, the engineer's face changed. Not relief. Relief was too clean. What crossed, it was something harsher and more private. The look of a person realizing they had spent weeks surviving toward a possibility and had just now reached the first solid inch of it. Mercer passed her a water tube. "Sip." not a hero amount. She obeyed. Hale crouched at the entrance and studied the eastern dark. We've got maybe 20 minutes before whoever's left either regroups or decides this coast is cursed. Then we move now, Mara said. Mercer looked at his patients. We move ugly. Ugly is still movement. They built the drag rig from what remained. Lewis on the rear line. Leg wound in the middle with a splint reinforced by a broken rail bracket Briggs had salvaged from the battery approach. Chest wounded man in front where Mercer could keep a hand on him. Valles on her own feet with Hale. Mara and Briggs alternating security and lift where the ground steepened. The cable trench was a slash through basalt descending in broken switchbacks toward the sea, half filled with rubble where old retaining walls had failed. It smelled of salt, rust, and plants crushed under boots. Dawn had begun to stain the eastern horizon a weak iron gray, enough light to separate land from sky, but not enough to make anything kind. On the third switchback, they took contact again. 3 men, exactly where Pike had said a secondary cell might be, and exactly where Mara had feared the route would pinch narrowest. 2 above on rock shelves. 1 below, near the final bend. Locals maybe remnants. Armed either way. The first shot punched sparks from the stone by Briggs's boot. Contact front, he snapped. Everyone dropped as much as the wounded allowed. Mercer covered the chest casualty with his own body and still somehow found room to fire upward with one hand. Hale dragged Valles behind a slab of fallen retaining wall. Mara arranged the lower shooter, waited for the next muzzle flash, and answered with 1 round. The lower threat vanished. The 2 above began firing in offset rhythm, trying to walk rounds down into the trench where the team could not easily maneuver with casualties. Mara listened. 1 rifle, 1 older machine carbine, different recoil cadence, different reload discipline. One of them was better. She edged out, saw only rock, withdrew before the answering rounds could find her. Dust stung her face. Hale leaned closer. Can you take them? Not from here. He glanced at the trench wall. I can push left. You push left with wounded, and you lose somebody over the edge. Mercer called from behind them. My vote remains against that plan. Mara looked up at the retaining wall above the trench. Old stone, poorly mortared, undercut by decades of runoff. She reached in her pouch and pulled the narrow, breaching strip she had hoped not to use tonight. Briggs saw it and understood at once. Wall drop. 5-meter section if we're lucky. And if we're not, we stay in shape. Hale was already repositioning the wounded. Do it. Mara crawled upslope beneath cover fire, wedged the strip into the cracked seam of the retaining stones, ran the lead around a jut of basalt, and slid back down. Cover your ears, Mercer muttered to the casualty he was shielding. The charge snapped with a sharp, dry violence. Not huge, precise. The wall above them gave one slow geological sigh, and then collapsed in a sheet of stone, shale, salt crust, and thorn roots. One shooter disappeared instantly under the slide. The second tried to scramble and lost his footing, tumbling down the shelf into view, just long enough for Briggs to end it with a control pair. Silence returned, ragged and full of settling pebbles. Mercer lifted his head. You know, when people say they like subtle women, I'm starting to suspect they haven't met you. Move, Mara said. By the time they reached the notch above Echo, dawn had fully arrived in the restrained way deserts do after storms. The horizon over the sea glowed pale silver. Low clouds moved away in broken sheets. The water below was steel gray and restless, churning white where the shelf cut into it. From the notch, the extraction point itself remained invisible from above unless you stood on the very edge. That had been the whole point. Hale cracked an infrared marker and shielded it in his fist until the last possible second. Mara keyed the net. Echo ready. Minimal signature. Rourke answered at once. Boat inbound. 90 seconds. No lights. They took those 90 seconds in breath, pain, and small practical acts. Mercer checked chest sounds again and nodded once, satisfied enough to keep hoping. Briggs adjusted Lewis's sling without being asked. Valles sat with her back to rock, watching the sea as if it might still produce another threat out of habit. Hale stood beside Mara at the notch, both of them scanning the coastal shelf and the high ground, even though the battle, for the moment, had finally run out of men. The boat appeared exactly when it should have, rising from behind a black rock fin on low engine and expert hands, the same kind of dark utility craft that had brought Mara in. No lights, no wasted spray, just a shape becoming an option. As the coxswain eased alongside the shelf, Hale looked at Mara. "When Dalton told me to listen to you, I thought he was being generous with someone else's confidence." "That sounds like Dalton." Hale's mouth moved a fraction. "I was wrong." Mara kept watching the ridge. "You weren't wrong about the route. You were wrong about the enemy. And you weren't." "No," she said. "I just hated that I was right." They loaded the wounded first, then Velez, then Lewis, and Lewis went with hands under him, not straps alone. Mercer nearly collapsed getting into the boat and denied doing so before anybody could accuse him. Briggs climbed last after a final look inland, as if daring the coast to try once more. Hale paused 1 second longer beside Mara. "You coming?" "In a second." He followed her gaze toward the highlands where Wadi 7 lay invisible now in the morning haze, just another fold in brutal country unless you knew what had happened there. "Lewis had 2 kids," Hale said quietly. 8 and 11. Mara nodded once. "He always packed powdered coffee in waterproof bags because he swore the official stuff tasted like burned wire." Mercer, from the boat, called weakly, "That's because it does." Hale almost smiled, but the grief under it stayed visible. "You save what you can. I know that. Doesn't mean the ledger balances." "No," Mara said. "It doesn't." He looked at her then, seeing perhaps not the myth that would grow around the night, but the cost still sitting in the open. "You still came." This time she did look at him. "He asked for help." Hale glanced toward Mercer in the boat, then back. He whispered it. That was enough. They climbed in. The ride back to Marrow Key was hard and wet and ugly, the hull hammering chop while dawn widened over the sea. Nobody spoke much. Speech belonged to safer decks. Mercer lost the fight to remain conscious halfway across and slumped against the bulkhead with dried blood on his cheek, one hand still resting protectively on the wounded man nearest him. Velez sat opposite Mara, wrapped in a thermal blanket, burned hands open in her lap, eyes never fully closing. After 15 minutes, she said, voice rough from smoke and salt, "You knew to break the guidance bus first." "I guessed." "You guessed correctly. You were already breaking it." Velez looked down at her hands. "I built systems like that for maritime defense. At least that's what the contracts called it. Safe shipping, anti-piracy corridors, layered deterrence." She gave the smallest, humorless breath. "Everything is defense when the invoice is written carefully enough." Mara didn't answer. Some truths didn't improve by agreement. Velez went on. "When they took me, they wanted the fast solution. Field adaptation, minimal calibration, something theatrical enough to hold a coastline hostage. I kept making tiny mistakes. Not enough to get shot. Enough to buy days." "How many?" 17. Mara looked at her. "You counted." "I had to count something." The boat hit a wave hard enough to slam all of them sideways. Hale steadied Lewis instinctively, even though Lewis no longer required steadying. Velez watched that and said, even more quietly, "The man who fed your route. Did you get him?" "Not me," Mara said. "But yes." Velez turned her face toward the wind and shut her eyes at last. Marrow Key at first light was a place of machinery, salt, and consequences. The boat came in under armed watch. Medics hit the dock before the engine fully died. Stretchers appeared. Orders were short and clean. Someone took Velez toward a sealed debrief room with a trauma specialist already waiting. Someone else took Mercer protesting toward surgery. Lewis was carried under a flag that had been found and unfolded with more care than anything else on the pier. Rourke met them at the top of the ramp. He looked older than he had 6 hours earlier. Not in posture, in the eyes. "Hale." "Sir." "Report later." "Medical now." Hale started to argue, saw it would fail, and didn't spend the energy. Dalton arrived a heartbeat after, moving fast enough that rank and exhaustion briefly fought over his stride. His gaze went first to Hale, then Briggs, then the stretchers, doing the terrible Count commanders do by instinct. 1 Kia, Hale said before he could ask. 2 wounded alive. Valles recovered. Carry dead. Launcher disabled. Dalton closed his eyes once. Open them. And Chief. Mara stood a few feet away. Grime turned to paste on her uniform. One side of her face cut by stone, hands blackened with soot and old blood. Dalton crossed the ramp to her and stopped at arm's length. The dock around them was all motion and noise, but for 1 second it narrowed to 2 people who had started the night disagreeing about a line on a map. 25 enemy dead or incapacitated on your axis, Dalton said quietly. That's the preliminary count from drone, battery, and route analysis. Mara said nothing. Some of those were blue teams. Some from the battery detonation. Most weren't. Still nothing. Dalton looked past her at the mainland. My father also said geometry only matters if somebody is willing to walk into it when everyone else wants the obvious road. He held out the spare earbud. She had returned somewhere between the boat and the dock. I was wrong about history. Mara took it. History wasn't helping. No. He glanced toward Lewis being carried away. But you did. It was not praise in the comfortable sense. It was acknowledgement paid at full cost. Inside the secure annex, Adrian Pike sat in a metal chair with 2 agents behind him, and the false comm finally stripped off for good. The fluorescent light showed how tired he really was. He had stopped trying to look elegant. That, more than the split lip, made him seem smaller. Rourke stood opposite him. Kim was to one side with a tablet and transcript feed open. Dalton came in late, bruised knuckles clean, but not hidden. Pike looked up as they entered. Did they make it? Dalton's expression did not change. Enough of them. Pike swallowed once. And Carrie, dead. For the first time, the liaison's mask cracked into something like genuine regret, though even now it was tangled with professional frustration. Then the buyer chained eyes with him. Kim said, "One offshore vessel already doesn't care." Pike looked at her. "You think I wanted them hit at Wadi 7? Dalton took 1 step closer. "I think wanting stopped mattering when you transmitted the route." Pike looked past him to Rourke instead, perhaps because he still believed colonels thought in layers that might excuse him. If we'd held the line and watched, we could have rolled up financiers, shippers, foreign procurement. Real architecture, not just gunmen on a hill. Rourke answered with the patience of a man too tired to pretend he hadn't heard that philosophy before. You are not the first intelligent man to convince himself that sacrificing visible lives for invisible gains is a form of courage. Pike's jaw flexed. "Then you know I'm not entirely wrong." "No," Rourke said. "You're worse. You were partly right and morally ruined." The words landed harder than shouting would have. Kim closed the tablet. Raw intercept records show the source you were protecting inside Brass Crescent had already gone dark 16 hours before Blue Team launched. You kept steering the operation anyway. Pike stared at her. She met it evenly. You weren't protecting an asset anymore. You were protecting your decision. That ended whatever remained of his argument. On the medical side of the island, Mercer woke up in recovery to a nurse telling him that if he removed his foreign, she would personally request a psych consult. He accepted this in the same spirit he accepted morphine, suspiciously and with partial gratitude. Mara found him there near noon, standing just inside the doorway while sunlight through the blinds striped the floor and the room smelled like saline, antiseptic, and clean linen trying and failing to cover blood. Mercer turned his head, saw her, and gave a weak grin. "I was told a mountain ghost dropped by. You're alive. That means standard slipped." He looked at the dressing on his thigh. "You know, in my defense, I sent help a very small and polite request. You arrived like an audit. That's because your request was vague." He laughed once and winced for it. Then his expression settled. "Lewis." Mara nodded. Mercer stared at the ceiling for a few seconds. He hated cold eggs, so they tasted like punishment. Useful information. It is if you're trying to understand greatness. He looked back at her. "Did we stop it?" "Yes. All of it. Enough of it." That seemed to satisfy him more than a cleaner lie would have. After a while he said, softer, "When you came over that ridge, I thought I was hallucinating. 3 shots, and the PCAM just stopped existing." Mara leaned against the doorframe. "You weren't hallucinating." "No, I know." He studied her for a moment. Why'd you really come? Not the official answer. She could have given him the same line as Hale. She could have reduced it to duty, orders, probabilities, operational necessity. All would have been true. None complete. Instead, she said, because somebody taught me a long time ago that if you can still hear a call for help, then the situation is not yet finished. Mercer nodded slowly, as if filing that somewhere permanent. Sounds like your father. It sounds like me, Mara said. That was new. Saying it, hearing it, letting it stand. Later that afternoon, after debrief, and after the reports began their long process of draining blood in the language, Mara stood alone on the far end of Marrow Key's maintenance pier with her father's cracked compass in one hand. The sea had calmed. Sunlight lay flat over it in blinding sheets. Far off, a destroyer cut the horizon on steady heading, gray against blue. The island behind her hummed with ordinary bass, noise returning by degrees. Forklifts shouted inventory, a mechanic dropping a wrench, rotors in the distance. Life reassembling itself around the hole the night had punched through it. Footsteps came up behind her. Dalton stopped beside the rail, close enough to speak without forcing it. Neither of them looked at the other immediately. The official count settled at 25, he said. Enemy dead across the ravine, basin, battery, and trench. Confirmed. Mara turned the cracked compass once in her fingers. The needle trembled, found north, held. Dalton added, Pike will disappear into a process none of us will enjoy reading about. Valles says the hardware chain he built around her can now be rolled up from the inside. So maybe some part of the larger thing survives. Maybe. He glanced at the compass. Your father's. She nodded. My old chief used to talk about him like he was 10 feet tall. He was average height. That earned a brief laugh. Then Dalton grew serious again. For what it's worth, nobody on this island thinks you were here because of him now. Mara slipped the compass back into her pocket. That's not what bothered me. What did? She looked out at the sea where the boat had come and gone, where the fast mover had died, where so many strategic arguments always ended in water and names on lists. The possibility that I was still measuring myself against a ghost. Dalton took that in. And now I think ghosts are useful for bearings, not for commands. He leaned on a rail with forearms scarred by years of service and nodded once, as if some private equation in him had resolved too. Blue team ships out in 48 for recovery and then stateside. Hale asked if you'd speak to Lewis's kids by secure link when the family brief is over. Mara's first instinct was to refuse, not from fear of the children, from fear of imprecision. There are no exact words for such rooms. Dalton must have seen some of that cross her face. You don't have to. Yes, Mara said after a moment. I do. That evening, under a sunset the color of burnished copper over the sea, the island held a transfer ceremony on the flight line. No speeches longer than needed. No sentimental music forced through speakers. Just wind, flags, boots, and people standing straighter than their exhaustion wanted. Lewis's case moved past them beneath the flag. Mercer stood on crutches and borrowed sweats and ignored every instruction to remain indoors. Hale stood beside him with one arm in a sling. Briggs looked like he had not slept and did not plan to start. Valles watched from farther back with both hands bandaged, expression unreadable and dignified in a way that suggested surviving captivity had burned away any appetite for performance. When the case passed, Mara brought her hand up in salute with the others. Held it, lowered it only when protocol and emotion aligned enough to let her. Afterward, as the line broke and dusk deepened, Valles approached her carrying a slim metal object wrapped in cloth. They let me keep this, the engineer said. She unfolded the cloth. Inside was a scorched calibration stylus from the battery platform, its tip bent, its casing blackened by the detonation. I use it to jam the fin housing, Valles said. You tore the cable at the right moment. If you had hesitated, even by a second, the rail would have cleared enough for a seaward launch. Mara took the stylus, surprisingly heavy for its size. Why give it to me? Because engineers keep souvenirs from systems that failed for the right reasons. Valles met her eyes. And because one day someone will ask whether the story is exaggerated. You can show them the burned metal and let them decide. Mara almost smiled. I don't collect trophies. This isn't one. Valles looked toward the darkening sea. It's a reminder that precision can also be mercy. Then she left, moving carefully but under her own power. Night came soft over Marrow Key. Floodlights clicked on along the docks. Somewhere in the barracks, somebody had already started retelling the operation badly, compressing fear into bravado the way soldiers and sailors had always done. By morning, the story would have edges added to it. By next month, Mara suspected, she would have become taller in the telling and quieter in the details that mattered. That was how these things traveled. What survived was seldom the clean truth, just the parts people needed. Near midnight, when most of the island had gone to work, sleep, or silence, Mara returned to the signal van where the night before she had circled a patch of wrong-looking earth on a map and tried to talk professionals out of a fatal route. The cold coffee mug still sat where she had left it. She stood for a long moment in the dim equipment glow, listening to the hum of electronics and distant surf. On the table lay the updated operational map of the Kharif coast. Wadi 7 marked in red now. Ras Camel in black. Pike's compromised relay nodes annotated for takedown. New safe corridors beginning to appear where old assumptions had died. She picked up a grease pencil. Not because she couldn't stop, because this was how continuation looked. Not triumph. Work. Better lines. Fewer blind spots. A chance, maybe, that the next whisper for help would reach someone before the trap closed all the way. The van door opened behind her. Kim stepped in carrying 2 fresh coffees. I figured the old one had become a weapon. Mara accepted the new cup. Reasonable assessment. Kim set her own down and glanced at the map. You're already reworking the coast. I'm correcting it. Kim watched her for a second. Mercer says you arrived out of nowhere. That's because Mercer confuses incomplete observation with myth. Blue Team doesn't. Mara capped the grease pencil. Blue Team was busy. Kim smiled faintly, then looked at the red circles on Wadi 7 and Ras Camel. You know, this won't be the last time somebody in a nice shirt decides the bigger picture can spin people. No, Mara said, and Mara looked through the open van door toward the island lights, the sea beyond them, and the darkness farther out where ships moved unseen and decisions were already being made by people who would never smell the blood or stone of the places they altered. And next time, she said, we build the picture before they touch the route. Outside, the wind had shifted calmer, carrying salt and fuel and the distant rhythmic clang of maintenance on steel. Somewhere on the medical side of the island, Mercer was probably arguing with a nurse. Somewhere in secure holding, Pike was learning how long a night could become when there was no strategy left to hide inside. Somewhere over black water, the destroyer kept watch. And inland, beyond the horizon, the mountains of Kharif sat exactly where they had always been, full of old tunnels, older grudges, and men who still believed darkness belonged to them. Mara lifted the new coffee, finally warm enough to matter, and bent over the map. The cracked compass rested beside the burned stylus on the table. North held steady. So did she. For the next 3 days, the island behaved as if routine could be rebuilt by repetition alone. Fuel arrived. Fuel got logged. Rotors spun. Crates moved. Reports were filed. Men with clipboards tried to trap chaos inside number boxes. It almost worked if you stayed far enough from the details. Mara spent most of those days in rooms without windows. First came the formal debrief with recordings, synchronized feeds, paused frames, route overlays, and a strange forensic coldness that settled over violence once everyone had survived it long enough to analyze it. She walked them through Wadi 7, the terraces, the basin, the cistern, the battery. Every movement became a point on a map. Every decision had to be spoken aloud as if logic, once verbalized, could soften consequence. At one point, an investigator from Theater Command leaned forward and asked, "When did you first assess Pike as actively compromised rather than merely negligent?" Mara looked at the projected trace of the relay traffic and answered, "When the enemy corrected to the alternate route faster than local observation allowed." Meaning somebody wasn't just watching us. Somebody was helping them understand us. The investigator nodded, as if he had learned something new. Mara had to remind herself that many people only ever met war once it had already become paperwork. Then came the intelligence session with Valles. That room felt different from the others. Less like prosecution, more like salvage. Valles sat wrapped in a plain gray sweater issued by Supply, her bandaged hands resting on the table, hair still uneven from captivity, eyes sharper each hour she spent away from her captors. On the wall screen glowed diagrams of the missile guidance unit's brass crescent had forced her to assemble. Components rotated in three-dimensional renderings. Inertial package, control bus, thermal battery, fin actuator modules, target input array. Each one precise. Each one elegant in the way dangerous engineering often was. Kim handled most of the technical questions. Rourke listened. Mara stayed against the wall until Valles asked for her specifically. At Ras Camel, the engineer said, "You knew Carey would go to the backup trigger before he tried to run." "He was too invested in the signal," Mara said. Valles inclined her head. "Yes, men like that stop believing in survival once they can still win the message." The debrief officer asked, "You assessed him as ideologically driven?" Valles gave a tired half-shrug. "No, I assessed him as professionally vain. Ideology was the coat he wore over that. That got written down because in certain rooms language like that mattered." 2 hours later, after export routes, broker names, shell fronts, and offshore rendezvous patterns had all been dragged into the light, Valles finally asked for a break. Most people stood too quickly, eager to leave the accumulated gravity of the room. Mara didn't. Valles remained seated, looking at the frozen wireframe of the launcher assembly on screen. "You ever notice," she said quietly, "how often the world asks technical people to pretend they are neutral?" Mara waited. If a bridge holds, it is engineering. If a missile guides, it is engineering. If a port surveillance network catches pirates, engineering. If the same network tracks refugees for extortion, still engineering. Valles flexed one bandaged hand and winced. "People love the myth that skill is clean." "It isn't," Mara said. No, Valles looked up. "Neither is rescue." There was too much intelligence in the statement to answer quickly. Mara crossed the room and rested one hand on the back of an empty chair. "You kept them from launching for 17 days, she said. "That matters." Vales's expression didn't soften exactly. It narrowed around an older pain. "A man still died in the ravine." "Yes." "And a boat crew died offshore." "Yes." "And Carey died in that room." Mara held her gaze. "Also yes." Valles took that in, then nodded once, as if relieved not to be offered false absolution. "Good," she said. "I'm tired of people trying to clean blood with phrasing." By the 4th day, Mercer was mobile enough to become a problem again. He had graduated from hospital gown to training shorts, from 4-line to limp, and from formal medical supervision to the more porous kind that relied on threats and his own unreliable sense of self-preservation. Mara found him outside the armory under the shade of a corrugated overhang, seated on an overturned case, working a knot out of a torn sling with the concentration of a man performing surgery on cheap fabric. "You're supposed to be resting," she said. Mercer looked up. "I am." Aggressively. His thigh was still wrapped. His face had more color than it had in recovery. The dark circles remained. Mara leaned against a steel post. "How's the chest casualty?" "Stateside flight this morning." "Stable. The leg guy keeps telling everyone he could have walked out if we'd let him, which is exactly the kind of lie I expect from professionals." "And you?" Mercer held up the sling. "Rehabilitating the nation's supply inventory." She might have left then, but he said, in a voice gone suddenly more serious, "Hale got the family brief done." Mara looked at him. Lewis's wife asked if the woman from the ridge was real. The island noise seemed to pull farther away for a moment. Forklift beeps. Wind through rigging. Somewhere, a wrench struck metal. "What did Hale tell her?" "That you were." Mercer set the sling down. "Then the kids had questions." Mara's posture stayed the same. Only one finger tightened against the steel post. "What kind?" "The honest kind." He offered a faint, tired smile. "Did he get scared? Did he say anything funny? Was he brave? Did it hurt? Did he know they were trying to bring him home?" Mara said nothing. Mercer spared her by looking out toward the dock instead. "Hale Answer the big ones. But he said he still wants you on the secure call if you'll do it. When? Tonight. He glanced over. You can say no. No, Mara said. I can't. The call took place in a communications room that had been made as gentle as military spaces knew how to be. Lower lights. No visible weapons. Chairs instead of briefing stools. A pitcher of water nobody would touch. On the screen appeared Lewis's wife in a living room somewhere thousands of miles away, her shoulders squared with the deliberate posture of someone refusing to collapse before strangers. Beside her sat a boy of about 11, trying very hard to look older than he was, and a girl younger by a few years, clutching a stuffed sea turtle under one arm. Hale did most of the talking at first. He told them Chief Lewis had led from the front, had protected his teammates, had done his job exactly as expected of him and better than many could have. He told them Lewis had been spoken of with respect on the flight line. He told them his team had not left him behind. Then Lewis's daughter asked, "Are you the one who came to help them?" Mara had known the question would come. Knowledge did not make the answer easier. "Yes," she said. The little girl nodded solemnly, as if confirming something important to herself. "Did Dad know?" Mara looked at the child, then at the mother, then at the son whose jaw was set too tight for his age. She chose precision because children deserved that more than comfort. "By the time I reached them," she said, "your father had already been fighting to protect his team. They were still carrying him when I got there. They did not stop trying to bring him home." The son spoke next. Was he scared? It was the same question every family asked, only worded differently depending on age. Mara answered just as carefully. Everybody is scared in a fight if they understand it properly. Courage is not about feeling nothing. It's about doing your duty while fear is there. The boy absorbed that, gaze dropping for a second before returning. Did he do that? Yes. The mother's expression changed then, not breaking but loosening around the edges, as if something inside her had been held under too much pressure. "Thank you," she said, and the words were simple enough to be unbearable. After the call ended, Hale remained seated with both hands clasped between his knees, staring at the blank screen. Mara stood to leave. "Chief." She paused. He still didn't look up. When we were pinned in that ravine, I kept running route logic in my head. Distances, ammo, elevation, time to bleed out, time to overrun. You know what wasn't in the math? What? That somebody would decide the equation wasn't finished. Mara let that sit in the quiet room a moment. "Equations don't decide," she said. "People do." He nodded once. "That's what bothers me." That same evening, Rourke summoned her to the old weather office at the far end of the command block, a room he preferred when conversations needed less ceremony and more honesty. The walls still held faded maritime charts behind newer screens. A standing fan pushed warm air around with limited success. Through the window, the sky over Marrow Key was deepening into violet. Rourke stood over a file on the desk when she entered. "Close the door." She did. He gestured to the chair opposite him. "Sit." That alone told her it mattered. On the desk lay a thin folder stamped with classification markings and a second document face down beneath it. Rourke tapped the first. "Pike has started cooperating in the only way men like Pike ever truly cooperate. He's naming the corners of the machine he thought he could control. That fast. He understands the difference between disgrace and prison, and he is ambitious enough to bargain for the smaller disaster." Rourke paused. "We've already got one seizure request moving through Allied channels. 2 shell companies frozen. 1 foreign broker missing, which usually means guilty." Mara said nothing. Rourke studied her a second, then turned over the second page. It was a recommendation packet. "I'm told theater wants to decorate this." "No, that was not me asking." Her eyes moved across the page without really reading it. Citations, language, gallantry, extraordinary action, voluntary insertion under fire, strategic effect. The bureaucracy of heroism. Rourke watched her reaction with the detached patience of a man who had seen others go through the same conflict. "You know why they do it? To create a shape the institution can understand." "Yes." He folded the paperback down. "And sometimes because men and women really did something extraordinary." Mara leaned back in the chair. "Lewis is dead." Yes. Mercer nearly bled out. Hale made choices he'll replay for 20 years. Valesse will carry a basement full of captors in her nervous system every day she lives. Pike will become an argument in classrooms run by people who've never had to choose under fire. She held Rourke's gaze. Which part of that do they pin to a ribbon? Rourke let the silence stretch before answering. The part that tells the next person hearing a whisper in the dark that going anyway is still a profession. That landed harder than she expected. He didn't press it. You don't have to like it. You just have to survive it. Mara glanced toward the window where the last light over the sea had thinned into a narrow band. That all? Not quite. Rourke slid a smaller item across the desk. A challenge coin. Old. Worn smooth at the edges. On one face, a trident and anchor. On the other, an engraved line almost rubbed away by time. She picked it up and turned it under the desk lamp. Your father gave me that in Mindanao in '98 after I walked our recon element into a swamp because I trusted a newer chart over an older fisherman. Mara looked up. Rourke's mouth moved a fraction, not quite a smile. He said, "Modern mistakes are still mistakes, Colonel." Then he handed me the coin, so I'd remember humility more than embarrassment. He nodded at the metal in her hand. I think he expected I'd know when to pass it on. For a second, the room seemed to hold 2 times at once. He talked about me? Mara asked before she could stop herself. Less than you'd think. Better than most. Rourke settled one hand on the desk. He once said his daughter didn't need his reputation. She needed enough room to build her own. I suspect he worried the first might interfere with the second. Mara closed her fingers around the coin. The metal was warm from the lamp and old from everything else. When she left the weather office, night had fully taken the island. Floodlights burned at the pad. A helicopter lifted somewhere beyond the fuel farm, rotors thumping the dark into measurable pieces. Voices carried from the mess deck, brief and tired and human. She walked not toward billeting, but toward the north seawall, where the island ended in black rocks and foam. There, with the sea wind moving cooler now and the stars cutting hard above the horizon, she found Valesse sitting on a mooring bollard with a blanket around her shoulders and both bandaged hands tucked under her arms. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Valesse said, "I recognize your father's name." Mara turned her head. From where? Shipping security conferences. Technical advisory boards. The rooms where operators and engineers are both invited and neither fully trusted. Valesse looked out over the water. He had a reputation for asking very impolite questions about failure assumptions. That sounds right. He once told a panel that engineers were too in love with ideal conditions and operators were too proud of improvisation, and that the ocean punished both forms of vanity equally. Valesse let out a quiet breath. At the time, I thought he was just being theatrical. Now, I think he was trying to keep people alive. Mara stood beside the bollard, hands in pockets, feeling the old coin in one pocket and the burned stylus in the other. Bearings and consequence. Valesse continued. I've been offered protective relocation. New identity if I want it. Do you? I want sleep. A small pause. After that, maybe testimony. Maybe teaching. Maybe spending the rest of my life making sure people understand that every elegant system contains a moral choice somewhere inside it. Mara nodded once. Good work if you can stand the audience. Valesse gave the faintest smile. And you? What do you do after they finish trying to congratulate you? The surf boomed once against the seawall, heavy and hollow. Mara looked east, where somewhere beyond the horizon, the mainland of Kharif remained dark and patient. Routes would shift. Networks would regrow. New men would learn old tunnels. Somebody else, somewhere else, was already drawing straight lines across terrain that did not deserve them. I redraw the coast, she said. Valesse turned slightly toward her. You say that like a cartographer. No. Mara looked back at the island lights, the moving shadows of crews still working, the machine of service grinding forward because it had to. Like someone who learned the map is never finished. They stayed there a while longer without speaking. Below them, water struck rock, withdrew, and came again. Behind them, Mero Key kept breathing in generators, watch rotations, recovery flights, and men who would soon carry the story onward in simpler forms. The ravine, the whisper, the woman on the ridge. They would say she came out of nowhere. They would say 25 enemies fell before sunrise. They would say help arrived when it shouldn't have. Let the Mara thought. The truth was stranger and smaller and more useful than legend. Help did not come out of nowhere. It came from old maps, unwelcome doubts, dead mentors, careful listening, bad weather, a medic who kept working while bleeding, an engineer who sabotaged her own brilliance one connector at a time, a commander who finally yielded pride to survival, and one decision repeated across stone and darkness until dawn allowed it to become story. At last Mara pushed off the seawall. The wind had shifted again. Gentler now. Salt on it, yes, but also the faint, warm smell of coffee from the night watch shack up the lane. She started walking toward the light.